In 1979, the world was just stunned. It watched one of the oldest monarchies on the planet get completely overthrown in what felt like the blink of an eye. You had a pro-Western king, the Shah, replaced by an exiled religious leader, an Ayatollah. This didn't just transform Iran, it redrew the map of the Middle East forever. So how on earth did this happen? Let's get into it.
And this right here, this really hammers home just how massive that change was. I mean, look at it. Before 1979, Iran is a monarchy. It's a key ally for the West in the Cold War. Its laws, mostly secular. Then, boom. After the revolution, it becomes a theocracy, a government run by religious leaders. Its whole identity is now based on being anti-Western, and Islamic law replaces secular law. The big question is, how does a change this deep, this fundamental, happen so incredibly fast?
To really understand the revolution, we can't just start in 1979. The story actually begins years, even decades earlier. It's a story about these deep cracks that have been forming just under the surface of the Shah's rule for a very long time.
So first step, you have to understand the political situation. The Shah was an absolute ruler, an autocrat. There were no real political parties to speak of. Elections were a sham, and any voice of opposition was crushed. And how did he do it? With his terrifying secret police, the Savak. These guys were notorious. They created this constant climate of fear with surveillance, arrests, and, yes, torture. There was basically no safe way for people to disagree with the government.
And then there was the money. Iran was swimming in oil wealth, but for the average person, they weren't seeing it. The Shah pushed for this super fast industrialization, but it kind of backfired, leading to crazy high inflation and unemployment. People flooded into the cities looking for a better life and instead found these awful housing shortages. All while government corruption was just everywhere. A huge chunk of the population felt completely shut out from their own country's prosperity.
Now, this might be the most crucial piece of the puzzle, the cultural clash. The Shah was all in on Westernization. He was pushing Western clothes, Western culture, Western social norms. But for a lot of religious and traditional Iranians, this felt like an attack on their very identity, on their Islamic values. His critics even had a name for it, Westoxification, like it was a kind of poison. That, plus his extremely close ties to the United States, created a ton of resentment, especially from the powerful religious clergy.
So you've got this powder keg, right? All this political anger, economic frustration, and cultural resentment just waiting. All it needed was a spark to set it all off, and a person to channel all that rage. Well, that person was an exiled cleric named Ayatollah Khomeini. And get this, Khomeini wasn't even in Iran for most of this. He was in exile, first in Iraq, then in France, but from there he became the voice of the opposition. His message was brutally simple and incredibly powerful. The Shah's corrupt, his government is un-Islamic, and he's just a puppet for America and the West. His speeches were recorded on these little audio cassette tapes smuggled into Iran, and they just spread like wildfire.
And here's the really key thing. Khomeini wasn't just criticizing. He wasn't just tearing something down. He had a plan for what to build in its place. His theory was called Vilayat al-Faqih, and what it basically argued was that the people who should be in charge, the people who should have the ultimate political power, aren't kings or politicians. No, it's the Islamic scholars, the jurists, because only they can make sure the country is truly following God's law.
And wow, did things unravel fast. Look at this timeline. All through 1978, you get this vicious cycle. There's a mass protest, the Shah's forces crack down and kill people, and then the funerals for those people turn into even bigger protests. Then, strikes start hitting, and critically, the oil workers go on strike. The economy just grinds to a halt. By January of '79, it's over. The Shah's power is gone. He gets on a plane and flees. And just a few weeks later, Khomeini flies back and millions of people pour into the streets to welcome him home.
Okay, so the king is gone. The monarchy has collapsed. But now what? The revolution wasn't really over. You see, all these different groups, religious conservatives, leftists, secular nationalists, they had all worked together to get rid of the Shah. Now they had to figure out what came next.
Well, that question got an answer fast. Like, really fast. Just 2 months after Khomeini came back, in that incredible supercharged atmosphere, they held a national vote. And the choice was simple, almost blunt. Do you want the old monarchy, or do you want an Islamic Republic? The people voted, and they overwhelmingly chose the Islamic Republic. It gave this new clerical leadership a huge, popular mandate to remake the entire country.
And that new reality meant some absolutely massive changes on the ground. Just look at the before and after. The political system totally remade. Instead of a king, you now have a supreme leader with the final say on everything. Laws about women's rights got a complete overhaul, the most visible sign being the new mandatory veiling, the hijab. And in a sad twist of irony, while the Shah's hated Savak was gone, the new government pretty quickly started cracking down on its old allies, the secular and leftist groups who had also fought to bring down the monarchy.
But this whole thing wasn't just happening in a bubble. The revolution didn't just change Iran. It sent these massive shockwaves out across the entire world and completely changed the game in the Middle East.
If there's one number that captures this new era, it's this one, 444. That's how many days a group of American diplomats and citizens were held hostage after radical students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. The Iran hostage crisis, as it came to be known, was a global spectacle. It absolutely destroyed relations with the United States and cemented Iran's new identity as a defiant anti-Western power.
And the shockwaves just kept spreading across the Middle East, yet Islamist movements, both Shia and Sunni, feeling inspired and emboldened. The leaders of neighboring countries, especially monarchies, were terrified. In fact, Iraq's dictator Saddam Hussein was so scared that this revolutionary spirit would spread to his country that he invaded Iran in 1980. That started a horrible, bloody 8-year war that killed maybe 1 million people. And out of that fire, Iran started building up proxy groups, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, to fight its battles abroad, a strategy that shapes the entire region to this day.
You know, this gets to what is maybe the revolution's deepest, most profound legacy. For most of the 20th century, there was this big idea, this assumption that as a country develops, as it modernizes and gets wealthier, it will naturally become less religious, more secular. Well, Iran completely flipped that script. It showed the world in the most dramatic way possible that religion could still be an unbelievably powerful force in modern politics.
So when you boil it all down, the Iranian Revolution was this perfect storm, wasn't it? It was popular anger against a brutal dictator, was a powerful religious idea that gave people a vision for a different future, and it was this deep, powerful hunger for true independence from foreign control. Now, more than 4 decades later, the world is still dealing with the consequences. Which brings us to the final big question. What does the legacy of this incredible event really mean for all of us here in the 21st century?